Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens with your host, Jake and Scott. And tonight we are talking about one of my favorite celebrity brands of whiskey, but actually we have the people that are creating the whiskey here with us today and tomorrow. We'll talk about that here in a second. And we are joined by Raj Alva, co-founder, as well as whiskey maker Ari Sussman, to talk all things Whiskey JYPSI. It's not just the ultra premium brand. You have to be watching out for their other series that they're putting out as well. So sit back and buckle into the latest conversation of the Bourbon Lens. Ari and Raj, thank you for joining us. And Raj, how is tomorrow looking for you or for us? Because you're a day ahead of us where you are in India.
So far, tomorrow is pretty rainy, so I'd get your rain gear out.
Okay.
It's monsoon season where I am right now.
Well, hopefully it's a little bit better for us here in the States. Ari, how's things in Michigan? I know you all have had a terrible storm season this year as well.
It's actually been a lovely dry summer in Michigan. Michigan is beautiful about 5 months out of the year. The rest of the time it's pretty cold. So it's always a joy in particularly making this whiskey and getting down to Nashville, which is our brand's home. So I have the great benefit of enjoying the lovely weather in Michigan when it's beautiful, and the rest of the time heading down to Nashville and soaking up some of that southern warmth. Yeah, well, it's definitely not cold here in Louisville. We are experiencing a heat wave, and I missed all the rain last week. So, Scott, sorry for you. I was enjoying all the fruity tropical drinks that I could have ever wanted in the Dominican Republic, and now I'm back to reality today. So, Scott, you held it down last week.
Fast.
No shit. Came in 9 a.m. meeting. Like that's what I woke up today. 9 a.m. finalist presentation. How about that? So it was real to get back to it, but we're excited to have you all on the brand. First and foremost, we like to give a shout out to the PR team. So Ed is your all's PR guy, and Ed has been awesome since the moment we found out about this release. We've been connected. We've gotten to try all the whiskey. Ed's been nice enough, and you all have been nice enough to send us samples. And we just want to say thanks to that. And one of the coolest things you all do is share, like you all actually read the reviews and like share them with your listeners and audience, which is awesome. And we've been featured in those. So thank you for sharing our thoughts about your all's whiskey, because you all are making great whiskey there. So getting into the fast facts here of life is we have a cool brand, and you've partnered with one of the bad boys of country music, Eric Church, one of my favorite concerts I've ever been to. And Raj, you co-founded it with Eric. Like, how did this come about?
Probably in a way that no other businesses come about. We were on a golf trip. We met through a trip that was organized by a mutual friend of ours. There was a group of guys actually going down to the Dominican Republic, where you just were. And my friend said, I asked who's coming. And he said, there's a couple of athletes, and there's this rock star coming. I said, who's that? He said, Eric Church. I said, who's that? And he said, he's a full-blown rock star. So we met, and we just hit it off. And he's just a solid guy. And we stayed in touch, and over a few drunken nights, we're talking about what we did for a living. I was asking him questions about him, and he was asking questions about my different career choices and businesses. And I think I was talking to him about Grayson, which is one of the businesses I was a founding investor in, still involved in. It's a golf clothing and lifestyle line. And I asked him what he's done in the business world, and he mentioned his deal with Jack Daniels and said how much he loved them and what a great experience that was. And I said, well, did you ever think about, doing something on your own? And he said, well, it's funny you say that. Kenny Chesney and George Strait have, both told me that I should do something on my own. And honestly, I didn't think anything of it after that. And then I got a phone call a couple of days later, just saying, were you serious? I said, well, not really. I don't know anything. I don't know much about the business side of it. I know a lot about the spirit side of it, but I don't know, from a drinking standpoint, I don't know a lot about it from the business side. And actually, one other thing happened on that call. I forgot to mention this, and you're in Kentucky, I guess. So I texted a friend of mine. I didn't realize how many people I knew in this industry, just random coincidence, but a guy named Joe Magliocco, who owns Michter's. And I said, hey, I'm sitting here with a friend. He's got a deal with Jack Daniels, and we had some questions on the space, and he texted right back, and we had a call with him, and for about an hour, and he just gave us a bunch of information, and so we kind of left it, and then I kept getting calls from my buddy who organized the trip. Hey, Eric was serious; he's really interested in this. So I called him back. I said, I really don't know anything about how this industry works. Give me a little bit of time. So I went back. I started making phone calls. Again, realized how many people I knew in the industry, ex-chairman of High West, people from Whistle Pig, and came back. And Eric kept calling me. He's like, dude, what's taking so long? I said, Eric, this thing's going to cost a lot of money. If we're going to do this, I want to do this right. So I came back and said, here's what I think. If we want to do this, we got to do. And this whole concept of high-end, spirits that are really focused on spirits. Because the one thing I said to him when I really looked at it, I said, we can't be a celebrity spirit. And he agreed. I said, if you look at these celebrity spirits, they're just slapping somebody's name on it, not really thinking about the product and hoping the fans buy it. And we wanted to do this as a long-term legacy, fun project, passion project. And, we both agreed that this has to be good product. I don't want to embarrass myself in a business by selling something that's just, trying to make money. It wasn't really about that. It was about, our reputations, having fun, doing something that we really had passion about. And so we agreed right up front if the product has to stand on its own. And so I hope it's done that. I think people call it a celebrity spirit. We kind of cringe when people say that. We really want it to be, just a great product that happens to have a celebrity that's involved. And Eric would be the first to tell you that. So we decided, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to launch at a very high price point, make sure that we, actually price point's the wrong word, just launch at a very high quality product and make sure people agree that we can make good product. And then we would move down the range from there and make it more accessible over time, which you're seeing with the Explorer launch. And we've got another launch that's going to be coming out that's going to be even more accessible from a price point. So from that point, we decided we need to find people who actually knew what they were doing in the space, because we definitely didn't. And so my first hire was Andrea Myers, who had worked at a couple different brands, Heaven's Door, Angel's Envy, and then I started looking into different master distillers, master blenders, and we interviewed a lot of people who you would know, really household names. And I met Ari. I can't remember who. I think it was a combination of a Google search and somebody recommending I talked to him, and it might have been David Mandel. And I got off the phone because I invested in a bunch of healthcare companies. It just happens to be a random space. I had done some deals, and I have a little bit of a science and math background. And Ari and I just kind of geeked out on the science of whiskey on the call. And I hung up the phone. I'm like, this could be really interesting. He understands that. When I started asking about flavor profiles and things, Ari was telling me about the chemical composition and how it actually affects the flavor. So I said to myself, well, we can actually make product that we can stand behind because we can now validate it. This is why it tastes the way it does. This is why this component or this aging, this piece of wood gives it this flavor profile versus just kind of putting it in a bottle and telling people it tastes this way, right? So then I put Eric on the phone with him, and Eric, I wasn't sure what Eric would think. And then apparently, Ari, I think you guys spoke for a couple hours, and I forgot, two creatives talking. It probably went in 100 different directions. And Eric called me back and said, I like this guy. I think this is our guy. And so, we kind of went from there. And, you had Ari's creative side matching up with Eric's creative side, and my geeky technical side matching up with Ari's geeky technical side. And that's kind of how it all came together. And then we spent, I think, a year already coming up with the first product. It was a long time, but we wanted to make sure we had it right.
Yeah. And what you mentioned, you can tell that it is artfully crafted, and, it might sound like we're blowing smoke, but it is. I mean, you're throwing a lot of different whiskeys into the mix, right? And so, Ari, it's your time to shine, right? So we'll talk a little bit about the first whiskey here, and you got to use the word whiskey appropriately. It may have some bourbon components, but it is a whiskey. And we'll talk about the journey, right? So it's made up of bourbon, Canadian rye, and American single malt, right? So it's got this weird complexity to it because it brings in a lot of characteristics and a lot of aged characteristics. So as you start to work in a project like this, you have, successful entrepreneur, you have successful musician, and, you're no stranger to working in that realm of the space. And they're like, hey, you need to create an ultra premium whiskey. Like, where does your head go as you start to think through that process?
That's a great question. It was really interesting talking to Raj and Eric for very early on. I also got the impression that the co-founders had a right brain, left brain synergy or balance. Raj and I went deep about our Michigan roots because we both have Michigan roots, as well as the science of whiskey making, which I learned about while working at the distillery at Michigan State University. So my training in whiskey making was highly scientific, oddly scientific, because there have not traditionally been places to learn about the science of whiskey making in the United States. And so I'm going to give a shout out to the late great Dr. Chris Berglund. But the idea for the journey, the idea of blending these different whiskeys together came primarily from my conversation, the first several conversations with Eric, which, as Raj mentioned, went on for a couple hours. You get two creatives in a room, and the ideas, if they can vibe, the ideas will flow. The ideas will snowball. And part of the conversation, we had a great, deep conversation where we wanted to get to know each other. I wanted to know why Raj and Eric were choosing to embark on a whiskey journey of their own. And I have this idea that, and it's kind of like a doctrine, which is outside of the family and outside of a person's love and what we choose to do with our love. Our labor is pretty much the most precious thing that we have. The things we create are important, and the people who we choose to create with, this is a big part of life. And so we have to be really selective about the people who we choose to work with, because these are in a large sense the people who we choose to live with. And part of the early conversations with Eric revolved around his creative process. I really wanted to know about his inspiration for creating music and creating song and creating poetry, and where did that spark come from? And he mentioned that he was inspired by all things musical, that he listened to all kinds of genres of music, and that his music is really a tapestry of different musical traditions. So I knew a little bit more about Eric than Raj did when he first heard of him. I went home, I listened to all of Eric's albums straight through in one night with some whiskey. And I heard in my ears, both in the lyrics and in the music, what Eric was talking about when he said he was inspired by these different musical traditions. I heard Scotch-Irish music, I heard folk music, I certainly heard country music, arena rock, Bob Seger.
Bob Seger, I was saying, bingo.
Bob Seger, another Ann Arbor, Michigan kid.
Wow. How about that?
Yeah. And so when Eric told me on the phone that he was really into Seger, I said, "Oh, that's great. We went to the same high school."
Ari Seeger, I don't know if you probably know the history. Seeger kind of saved his career when he got kicked off the Rascal Flatts tour. So
yeah, no, it's great that there's all these like
a lot of Michigan ties. Yeah,
a lot of Michigan ties. So I tried to think about, based on what Eric had told me about his creative process, and based on the feelings and ideas I was getting listening to his music and the way that he was able to weave together different musical traditions into the form of country music. One of the crazy ideas that came into my head, and which later we as a team developed, was the idea of making a whiskey sort of in the form of an American whiskey that draws on whiskey making traditions from across the world. So we came up with the idea of essentially reconstituting traditional mash bills. The journey, the first product we released, is actually, you had mentioned the bourbon component, the Canadian rye component, and the American single malt component. They're actually blended in the proportions of a 21% bourbon mash bill. So it's 70%, 99% corn bourbon, which is a very high corn bourbon to represent the influence of corn. It's 21% 20-year-old rye. That's to represent the 21% rye in a mash bill, and the 9% American single malt. And so the blending concept for the Legacy series, and each release is a riff on a traditional mash bill, comes directly from listening to Eric's music, and it's a whiskey inspired by his music.
Yeah, and I think that another thing, just to build off what Ari's saying, when we were building the business model and how we wanted to build this, we wanted to be differentiated. So not only did we not want to be a celebrity whiskey, but there's so when I was doing my research, I walked into a couple of different liquor stores and I just panicked. I'm like, oh my God, look how many whiskeys are on these walls. How do you differentiate yourself? Right. And, we really kind of tasked Ari with coming up with something that hadn't been done before. And if you think about what the Legacy series is, it's taking single grains and it's aging that were aged separately. So they each get their own flavor from their own barrel, as opposed to blending a mash bill and getting it all from the same barrel. And something Ari taught us early on, every grain has a different kind of maturity point where it's going to hit its peak and the flavor profile is going to change. So we have a lot more levers to play with on our product on a Legacy series of what we're going to do because of these single grain mash bills. And 001, which was just a really, really unique concept, allowed us to do that in terms of the ages of each of these separate grains, the corn being 7 to 8 years, the rye being 20 years, single malt being 4. Each one of those had a reason it was picked and why it gave us that flavor profile we wanted.
Jake, did you realize that whenever you were looking at the mash bill, like the 70, like 21?
No, and then so I went and looked at the other bottle, and I'm like, oh, that's an extremely high rye. Which, okay. So going on to the second one, it's like, oh, that was like the Remus, the highest rye bourbon like that they put out was like the 36, and so now I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, duh.
Now it clicks.
Yeah. Now and I'm clicks. Like, damn it, Ari, why did you like leave that little, it's like an Easter egg that you kind of overlook because you're just like, you're looking at the components separate. You're not looking at them in totality. So I think that's a really unique nugget that people should pay attention to.
Jake, is on us. We should have done a better job. It's the story's so complex to tell. It's almost, it's taking us time to explain it to people. The Alchemist was probably the most complex product we've made. And it's very hard. It's very hard to tell the story because not only do you have these individual components, but then Ari came up with this concept of finishing the rye in 3 different barrel profiles. So it's just a lot of different things. And the main point I was trying to get across on this is we aren't going to be hey, you've got a single barrel select here. You've got just a traditional Kentucky bourbon. We wanted to have products that just weren't done before or weren't done the right way, or we think could be done better. And there's so many great products out there, but you really, if you want to build a sustained legacy, no pun intended, you really do need to have something differentiated. So, Legacy was that kind of opening salvo for us. And, we'll get into Explorer later, I assume, but yeah, where we said, okay, we're not going to use the rules of the past. We're going to do whatever we want that we think creates the best liquid. And, that we just gave Ari kind of free runway to say, okay, come up with, whatever it is. And we had a lot of back and forth as a team. I mean, this took a long time. Each one of our products takes a long time to come up with. I mean, we're talking not weeks or months, sometimes years.
I think it really speaks to like the whiskey nerds too. It's like, I know you said like hearing the word celebrity brand or celebrity whiskey makes you cringe. And I can 100% see why you think that. Cause you could have just slapped a label on a Tennessee whiskey and be like, it's Eric Church whiskey. Like, but that's not fun, right? The whiskey nerds like diving into the details of, like, oh, there's a high corn, there's a single malt, there's a Canadian or an Indian, we're skipping ahead a little bit, but like an Indian single malt, like, but it's also done in like the Canadian whiskey style where, and maybe people don't know this, but whenever they make Canadian whiskey, they age whiskeys separately and then create a blend from those whiskeys, rather than like in America where we make a mash bill and then they distill it all together or cook it all together and then, distill it. So it is drawing on those different nerdy characteristics that people like to see.
It's also really similar to wine blending techniques. So in Canada, yes, they blend whiskeys after they're mature. Same thing with wine. We as a company pull a lot of techniques from our cousin industries, winemakers, brewers, perfumers, all of our cousins, basically our cousin industries, have developed techniques and methods of creating fully rounded, complex products. And in a sense, whiskey makers are a little bit behind in that. Just the way the whiskey industry has unfolded since Prohibition, there hasn't really been a need or a demand really for that kind of innovation. So we're at a point right now in the whiskey industry as a whole where there are these stocks of whiskeys available all over the world, which are phenomenal by themselves, but some of them have a higher purpose as being a blend, or maybe the best expressions of those whiskeys are as a component in a larger blend.
Yeah, I think that's really, really unique. And Canadian whiskey, I think, kind of is the bell cow for that. Being a great blending tool by itself, Canadian whiskey is very unique. But my interpretation of the 10 or 15 different Canadian whiskeys I have drank over the time, they all taste very similar. There's not a lot distinguishing them. You get a lot of the same kind of characteristic notes, but as a component in a 70-21-9, you're getting, and the age complexity. So you're getting the oak that's going to bring all of that up, but you're also getting like the depth and complexity that you want to kind of make it sing true versus a, traditional rye that at 21%, you're going to get the spikes of the flavor, right? So if you go back to the compounds, you're going to see the highs. You're not going to see the lows. It's going to hum to one note. So I think that's really a nerdy thing too, is you probably have the science on it. Where are the congeners? Where are the hearts, heads and tails, where are they showing up in this whiskey, and what compounds are they making them? I think would be really unique for most people to understand. I'm sure there's like a flavor map that you could create that component is bringing to the overall blend.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I'll use Canadian rye as an example. Canadian rye is generally aged in used cooperage, so it's not going to have a massive influence from the wood itself. One of the ways that Canadian rye really sings is when you get up to 15, 20 years old of being aged in a cool climate. One thing that's unique about cool climates is that liquids that are chilled can hold more dissolved oxygen. And if the liquid has more oxygen, it will drive different reactions over time than if it were in a warm climate with less oxygen. You get more esterification, you get development of flavors. Number one, you get development of flavors that wouldn't occur in warmer climates. And number two, even if they did occur in basically, in addition to not developing in warmer climates, they would be completely obscured in the whiskey if the whiskey had been aged in new American oak. So the combination of used cooperage and cool climate fermentation or cool climate maturation develops characteristics in whiskey that you could never achieve in, south of the Mason-Dixon line, for instance.
Yeah. And I think that's what's so unique about, Scotch or Irish whiskey as well, right? It's in that cooler climate, temperate zone. And you get a little bit of that in the Pacific Northwest even, right? Like what's happening in the American single malt movement. And you talk about someone borrowing from a concept, American single malt, right, and you put that in here, borrows from that brewery tradition, right? They're bringing that to whiskey in a heavy way because they're just saying, hey, if we just age this a little bit longer, it's better than that beer stuff. We get whiskey out of it and we put it in a barrel, right? Like not knocking on beer people right now. That's the cool thing. I think you talk about as we start to mature and we bring new categories forward, right? That's the innovation we've been missing since Prohibition is a new type of whiskey, right? That is come in. Rye goes back before Prohibition, so does bourbon. American single malt, that wasn't a thing. So declared by the TTB. So, I think that's what's really unique. You talk about the innovation happening. I think American Single Malt will push it forward from an innovation standpoint, at least.
From an innovation standpoint, and doing things in a new way is really important and part of the DNA of the brand. Approaching whiskey making in unconventional ways is part of it. And each of the series or each of the families that we release, Legacy being one, Explorer being another, they each innovate in their own way. And within the Legacy family, we are looking at innovating with this sort of notion of reconstructed mash bill blending, but also international blending and also cross-category blending. So we're really thinking about putting different whiskeys together, that we've never had put together. We're thinking about putting them together in new ways.
And it's actually allowed us, unfortunately, it costs a lot of money to do this, but it's allowed us to go out and buy inventory from all over the world that probably would have been used in individual components. We'll touch on the Indian single malt down the road, but it's allowed us to be very creative. We've created kind of a laboratory of products for innovation, where between different barrels we bought Mizunara oak, we have the French Transeo, between different categories of spirits we bought, from just traditional Canadian rye to Indian single malts. We've got this whole inventory of innovation that we can pick and choose from. And I think, Ari, we've mapped out 5-6 years of products that we're planning on launching that are all going to be very unique and different. It's interesting because, again, when I started looking at this space, blended products look like they were really looked down upon. And I personally think that's going to be the future of the industry. The Scotch have been doing it for a long time. It really allows you a lot more shots on goal, a lot more levers to pull when you're creating a product, and the taste profiles are just spectacular.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Johnny Walker is one of the biggest brands, if not the biggest brand in the world, right? So when we think about that, I think blended has been a negative term in the States for a very long time. But most whiskeys are blended at some point in time, right? Whether it's the same mash bill blended together or vice versa. But one thing you all brought up that's very interesting, because you all are collecting casks, not from just the US, but worldwide. And you don't have a traditional business model. You're not producing, where are you storing all of this whiskey? Is it housed at the individual houses that you're buying at, and then you're getting samples? What's that look like logistically? Because as an NPD or non-producing distiller, that's an interesting quandary that you all have.
I'll let Ari talk about that. We had to hire a full-time person for this. So I'll let Ari talk about this stuff.
Yeah, the truth is that we have stocks of whiskey in various locations.
Yeah,
our blending lab is in Nashville. Nashville is the home of our brand, but we have whiskeys stored at rickhouses across the United States, as well as some overseas, which we bring here eventually. And of course, we're purchasing secondary casks from all over the world as well.
Yeah.
So both whiskey and secondary casks are coming in from all over the world, primarily to Nashville, which is where we develop blends and where we finally blend the final blends.
Yeah.
And bottle.
Okay. So you do bottle in Nashville as well? So, and that's the other thing. If you look at the back of the bottle, for those who are listening to this or go look at a picture, you do have transparency on it. So you are saying where you're getting it from state-wise. Like, you're giving us more of a clue than most people, right? In the first blend, you're telling us, hey, it's Indiana and Canada. Okay, that makes sense. Do your homework, right? And then in the other one, like you're saying, hey, it's Tennessee, so think your bourbon's thinking different, right? And then you're obviously Canada and India. So I do love that level of transparency. Sometimes you're like, where's this from? Do you not want to say Indiana? Like, that's fine. That big distillery produces a lot of whiskey, and a lot of people should be enjoying it. End of story. That's nothing to be ashamed of. I think that's the thing, that after going and seeing a place like that, you're like, there's a lot of whiskey to be enjoyed, and their brands aren't, going to push enough of it. So why can't other brands like yourself enjoy that and create something
it's
unique?
Interesting. Sorry, it's interesting you say that. It's shocking how much product is out there and it's just the reality of it. There's so many brands, and very few people are actually distilling product. So the reality is a lot of the product made is third-party product. And, our whole plan all along is full transparency. Another thing when I was researching the industry I was kind of surprised at how hard it was to get data from, or just facts of different products and what's in it and what the blend is. And, I get it. It's a choice people make. Our choice, I think Bardstown was probably the first person to do it, putting on the back of the label what the blend was. And our choice was, because we really do, every single component is tested and thought through. Our thought was it's going to help us because we want people to know what's in there. We want people to understand why we chose certain products. There's a lot of thought behind each one of these components and why we finish it. So, Indiana makes some spectacular product, probably some of the best product out there in the market. And you've got Kentucky guys who are, we're partnered with Whiskey House for some of our future product production. We love those guys, and I'm convinced they're going to make one of the best products in the market. We want to talk about that because again, we're blenders, so we need to talk about the components and what goes in there.
Yeah,
and the back of our bottles, Explorer has the same. The back of our bottles shows every component and what we think the flavor profile. It's kind of that map you mentioned. What it's going to do for the product.
No, that's cool.
And to follow up on that, even the components that come from distilleries that people might be familiar with, in the back of Legacy One mentions this. I don't think most people have tried an Indiana 99% corn bourbon or an 100% single malt, right? So even if folks are familiar with the distillery, they're in all likelihood not familiar with the spirits that we're using from that distillery.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the thing. Like, there's not many people who have tried those expressions from them, and it's cool that somebody said, "Hey, we commissioned this," and then next thing you know, you get that opportunity.
I guess one of my questions to Ari is like your creative process. You kind of explored Eric's creative process with making music and bringing that to kind of what you were seeing for the brand, but you've been involved in quite a few brands, and people have leveraged you for your expertise and for your creative outlook on making whiskey. So, your title is whiskey maker. So kind of what is your thought with, when you guys are creating your next whiskey, are you looking at the end in mind, or are you looking at the components and saying like, what could we make with these components? Or are you trying to arrive at a final destination of saying like, well, we kind of want to make a whiskey that's going to involve, this traditional mash bill, this 70-21-9, or are you saying, I'm going to play in this playground and here are the toys that I'm playing with?
Mm-hmm.
So the creative process, it's different for different products. And one thing that's, I think, central to creating a whiskey that can mean something to people and can be a little bit more than just another whiskey on the shelf. Raj talked about walking into a liquor store and being overwhelmed by all of the options. But when you get down to it, it's a lot of riffs on some very basic ideas. So there's a lot of bottles to choose from, but they're fairly homogenous. From a creative point of view, I believe that whiskey has the ability to tell stories. As humans, we're storytelling beings. We communicate through stories. And some whiskeys have the ability to tell stories and to convey meaning. That's more than just, here's something that you can take a shot of. And I'll give you an example. We talked about two of the legacies, both the 21% riff as well as the 36% high rye riff. But the Explorer line that we came out with, which is our version of secondary finishes. A lot of brands do secondary finishes. Our approach is a little bit different. And again, the idea for it came out of a conversation that we all had, that we were talking about things within the gypsy spirit, we call it, our reason for existing, the sort of base level foundational gypsy spirit, which is this sense of sort of restlessness and discovery and being on a journey. That's central to our entire brand and everything that we do. And Eric actually mentioned at one point in the conversation the troubadour tradition. So the tradition of roving poets and musicians in Europe, who were some of the first folks to sing of matters of the heart and to travel from village to village and tell stories. It was a new art form, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, which has persisted to this day. And Eric, not to put words in his mouth, but is, I think, in a sense, considers himself a torchbearer of this legacy. So as far as the creative process go, we had to think, how can we make a whiskey in our very first inaugural Explorer that can maybe convey a story of the troubadours, which is something that we're all inspired by. So as far as your question about the creative process, something that inspired us was the troubadour. Then we essentially started a book club and reading about troubadours, and it turns out that some of the earliest recorded troubadours, or some of the first instances of troubadours, came out of the Tronçais forest in France. And as a wine lover, I know that the Tronçais forest also makes some of the finest barrels in the entire world. They mostly go to the region of Bordeaux. Bordeaux's are conventionally aged in oak from the Tronçais forest. And while a lot of American whiskey makers have been using French oak, it's oftentimes indescript French oak. And just like there are many types of American oak, and the oak that is grown in Missouri is very different than the oak that's grown in the Pacific Northwest or Minnesota. In France, there is an equal amount of variation amongst all the different oak varieties and the influence that they have on whiskey. So we thought it would be interesting in evoking the troubadour tradition to get oak from the Tronçais forest, to be hyper specific about the wood that we're getting. And we brought it in for a reason, because we're inspired by troubadours and we wanted to honor that tradition. But we weren't just honoring the troubadours in their historic sense. We also, in Explorer 1, used oak from Appalachia. And the reason for that is because that is one of the modern cradles of the troubadour tradition, particularly in country music. It happens to be where Eric is from as well. So with Explorer 1, the creative process had to do with learning about history, identifying regions where history that's meaningful to us actually took place, and then looking to see what inputs we could get from what super high quality inputs. It's critical. It's always about quality. Sure, we want to tell a story, but the table stakes is that we're purchasing and procuring high quality ingredients, and you can't get too much more high quality than Tronçais oak and Appalachian oak. And so that's an example of how our creative process leads to creating these whiskeys.
No,
it's also
very unique.
Caused Ari to learn something, because when we first started this project, he used to say Appalachia, but after Eric corrected him, he's now saying Appalachia.
Hey, it's
we live and learn.
Southerner.
It's just like you don't say Louisville, you say Louisville. Or Versailles, not Versailles. We can give you a whole Kentucky-isms. He's got his North Carolina-isms, I'm sure.
I'm gonna have to learn those. Now that we're partnered with Whiskey House.
Exactly. Yeah. You gotta learn them all. It's not Paris, it's Paris.
Exactly.
Well, just come to Louisville. We'll take care of you.
Done.
And it's one of those things you learn over time. But one of the other things I've really applauded you all on is your media kits. I find them to be very interesting. The Explorer series, I take time to read all that stuff. I find it to be, if you're going to send it to me, like, I need to pay attention to it. So I loved the maps in there. I thought that was really cool, unique. And it gave me a sense of place, right? Like, sometimes I think as a millennial, right? Like, one of the things that we are looking for as a generation is a sense of place. So if you're going to provide me experience, I need to feel that sense of place. So I felt my sense of place in France. I felt my sense of place in Appalachia. Like, I felt that. And as I drank that whiskey, to be honest, I was like, they put this out at $56 or whatever it was, somewhere under $60. And I was like, holy shit. Like, if they can do that, the broader audience will grow, right? Now I would try the $199 bottle of whiskey, right? And so, you talked about future plans. We'll get to those in a second, but we got to hit on this Indian single malt thing because it's all the new craze. You all were first to do it though, and I think that's what's really interesting to me is your all's whiskey's giving people, millennials, I think in particular, a sense of place as they drink, and so now it's more than just a sipping. And hanging out with friends, it's like, hey, I can connect music, I can connect place, I can connect history, and that's a big thing to do is create that experience while you're doing it.
It's interesting you mentioned that. We are part of our concept when Eric and I started this was it was more about, I think I said, having fun, what it means to our friends and people who are drinking this. We talked about other pieces of this. One of the pieces was giving back. We're going to have a charitable aspect to this. The other piece was, what do you feel like when you're drinking this? And we're going to be talking about and launching, in the near term, something that really talks about the lifestyle component of this. And we call it the gypsy spirit, but there's going to be some inspirational pieces of this brand too that we want to help people out, getting the word out, and giving them a feeling of who we are as people and as a product. So be ready. I think it'll be probably October-ish by the time we have it all together. But I think this brand will get a lot more filled out as we go forward. We've really focused on the spirits in the product up to this point, but you kind of hit it on the head in terms of giving people a sense of place. I think the overall concept of what we have here is exactly what you just said, giving people a sense of place.
Yeah. I tend to have a finding a nut as a blind squirrel every now and again. Scott can attest to that. I don't always find them, but occasionally in a podcast, I find one along the way. But speaking of finding something, you all found Indian single malt. It's become popular since then, since the Alchemist came out. And I want to focus on this in particular. It's not a big part of a blend, but it doesn't have to be a big part of a blend for it to stand out, right? So the easy question, right, Raj, you are actually sitting in India right now, is to say, why Indian single malt? But really, like, when you look at this, why Indian single malt, right? Like, is it because it plays back to heritage, or, it was just something that you all found available and Ari was like, hey, this would be cool, we can blend it in?
It's not really heritage. I don't think we looked at it and said, hey, Raj was born in India. I grew up in Michigan, but he was born in India. Let's put it in. It was a great coincidence, but Ari actually found, a great product. The 5-year-old version of this, we put 10-year-old in, won double gold at World Spirits. And, I had grown up going back to visit relatives and had a lot of relatives who drank Scotch whiskeys. And then, Indian single malt wasn't even really around. It was there, but nobody really drank it here. And I had mentioned, all right, hey, this stuff's kind of getting popular now. And he said, hey, I found some. And so it just happened to be the best product we thought fit for this category. And I will say, you can taste it. You can really taste it. Malt can overpower, a product like what we're making here. And so we really had to be careful because it is a really, strong component of this blend. But I'll let Ari talk to how he found it. But we bought a decent amount of this just because we thought it was just going to be the future of, our creative process.
Yeah. And I echo the sentiment on it can definitely show up in a blend, whether it's this one or, you mentioned Bardstown Bourbon Company earlier, their Amroot, collaboration, right? Like it's a very strong component. So if you've tried either of these whiskeys, you've basically got a full frontal in a very subdued way of what Indian whiskey is all about.
I'll give you a slightly geeky answer as well, just to add to it. We knew that we wanted to riff on a 60% corn, 36% rye, 4% malt mash bill. And in order to do that, so that those proportions are roughly equivalent to a very sort of traditional perfume making, what they call the perfume pyramid, where the foundation is about 60% of the blend. The mid-level is between 30 and 40%. And then it just gets what they call a top note in perfumery. And it's just a hook that brings the other two layers together. And you don't need very much of a top note in perfumery. But just looking at the conventional 36% rye mash bill, it already has sort of the structure of a traditional perfume. We had to identify the components that were going to be 60%, 36%, and 4%. And frankly, most of the American single malts are too young at 4% of a blend. They just don't have the character we're looking for. And because of the maturation conditions in India, it's so hot and so humid, there's a ton of reduction that happens in a barrel. So a 10-year-old Indian single malt is 10 or so gallons left in a barrel at the end. So it's essentially the equivalent of a 20 or 25-year-old bourbon, just based on how much liquid is left in the barrel and the concentration of those flavors, the non-volatiles, the compounds that don't evaporate out become concentrated over time. Kind of like if you cook a tomato sauce all day, and even as the volume goes down inside the pot, the flavor is intensified. And you get that character from an Indian single malt because of the maturation conditions. So we needed, if we knew that we were going to use 4% of the blend was going to be a single malt, we needed to find a single malt that packed a lot of punch in that 4%. And India was an obvious place to go to find it. What was remarkable is that we were able to find 10-year-old product in India, because that is very rare. The distilling industry, the premium distilling industry in India is not that old. And we were very fortunate to find exact input that we were looking for. 10-year-old Indian single malt is beautiful by itself, but it plays really well with others within a blend.
Yeah, I think this one plays, not to get into technical notes, you can always check out Bourbon Lens to check our thoughts on these whiskeys, but I think it plays really nice with the finished Canadian rye component. And then on top of that, the bourbon is aged in used cooperage, right? So it's not as intense, right? So you're getting a lot of cool components out of this. So nothing is giving you too much intensity. It plays really nice in the sandbox. It's not the one kid who literally just picked up sand and threw it at you. You're getting a little bit of every component. And Scott, I think this is the first time you've tasted it, as someone who is a high corn whiskey lover, what's your thoughts that you're getting, just kind of quick hits on this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of layers to this. Like when I initially nosed it, I was just comparing it to batch 1, and my first nosing note was it's got this real rich brown sugar note. But then when I go back to it, I get this lighter, airy, fruity note, and it's kind of sounds weird, but when you go to a carnival and you smell them making cotton candy, you get that lighter, you get kind of a wafting of sugary sweetness, but it's got a little fruitiness to it. So on the nose, I was well, I don't know what to expect about the palate of this one. So sitting here, I've been kind of going back to it, but and the palate is kind of the same. It's it starts out kind of bright, refreshing, almost like a hoppy beer, but then it finishes a lot more dark and rich for me. So like I said, to start, it's very layered. I wouldn't be able to peg it as Jake says, I love high corn bourbon, and it's because it's super, sweet, rich, vanilla, caramel, those type of notes. But this one's just okay, I'm going to go back to it and I'm going to find something different.
Yeah.
Scott, I think we could have 10 people taste it and have 10 different answers because it's so complex.
Yeah.
It's there's just so much going on in that. And I'm with you. I'm more of a high corn bourbon guy. And actually Ari and I went back and forth on this product multiple times in terms of the finish of the rye because of the port barrels that are in there. We were trying to figure out how much more should we be adding for sweetness, to kind of offset some of the other characteristics. But there are a lot of things going on in that, and that's I think why people enjoy it, because each time you taste it, you're going to taste something different.
Yeah, it's one of those like you want to sit down with it for a while, like we've done here for the past 45 minutes or whatever, and just keep exploring it. And like now that I'm running low, I'm gonna call Jake and be like, I need a little bit more, but he's a little bit far away. So
but be careful because it's 114 proof.
But yeah, it's just
it
like
hits you before you know it.
Yeah, it's like sometimes we taste a lot of whiskey, and I taste it and I'm like, okay, that's good. It's it's kind of one note, or there's like one thing that sticks out. But like this one, I want to go back to and be like, tomorrow, like, what do I taste?
Yeah,
and it'll probably be totally damn different. But
well, and that's the one thing that's staying true to me from the first time I drank it to now is I love the bitter dark chocolate finish, like killer, like absolutely killer finish. And then like that hint of like seaside smoke, right? That's what I'll call it. That is like ever persistent throughout the palate, is really nice. That's coming from the Indian single malt. Like I know that note, like, and it's nice to find it and then know that it's there, right? Like if it's a component, if you're spending the money to do it, I want to know it's there a little bit. I don't want you to hide it completely from me. And so that like little subtle smoke, this would be I don't know. I'm not the biggest cigar guy in the world, but this is like a cigar blend type of whiskey, right? You could have a really nice cigar and enjoy this whiskey for a very long time.
I'd love to test that.
And we have the Indian.
And we have
the Indian single malt certainly has that smoky character, that light smoky character that you talked about, but it also has a leafy, like a tobacco leaf or a tea leaf character, which we wanted to support with some of the dry fruit from the rye that was aged in port vermouth and cherry barrels.
Yeah,
and so that interplay between the characteristics of the Indian single malt, but supporting it a little bit with some of the deeper red fruit, was part of this creative process.
So we went in depth on the new one, right? You got to go a little bit deeper and nerdier on this, and I love that. And Scott and I will take this bottle. I will just go ahead and let you know we have a house of 10 folks for the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. We'll take this bottle. We'll take some pictures and we'll smoke some cigars, and we'll let you know our cigar and whiskey pairing at Kentucky Bourbon Festival. And we'll drink a non-Kentucky bourbon there because that's what we do. We'll drink whatever we want to because it's our house and that's what we want to do. But the interesting thing is you tease this out. We know David and John really well. We actually were, according to John and David, we were the first podcast that they did at Whiskey House before it was done. So you teased a little bit of the future and just even that comment that you're working with them. What does the future of the brand look like as you've road mapped out the next 3 to 5 years? What does, I don't want to use the word success, but what does the fun look like? What does the gypsy spirit look like to your all's terminology for the next 3 to 5 years?
I'll let Ari answer his. I'll give my version of it. So for me, the fun part is just working with the team and launching these products and really coming up with these creative ideas that we brainstorm together. The next piece I had talked about, which is going to be the gypsy spirit, where we're going to bring in some really inspirational stories to talk about people who we think embody the spirit of our product. That's a fun part of it as well. So you're going to see some videos and other things that are going to come out with people who you probably never heard of, but have just some amazing inspirational stories that we think embodies the spirit of our product. And we have some more. So I think I touched on this at the beginning. We started out with a very premium product on purpose because we want to make sure people understood we could make a great product. And it also gave us the most levers to pull because we could pick and choose these single grains, more expensive inputs, but we really were able to create something we thought was just, hit it out of the park. And, it obviously did with reviews at least and sales. But we want to make it accessible to everybody. So for me, the next 3 to 4 years is having products that we can launch that are even so. Explorer is in the 60-ish price range. We're going to bring in a product next that's going to be in the 40-ish plus or minus price range that will allow people who couldn't afford the first two to hopefully get in and be part of our gypsy bandwagon, as we call it, or caravan. Because I really think you need to make something for everybody. And it really is a individual product. Everybody's going to taste something different in these things. And, you want to make sure you have a product that anyone out there can like, that likes whiskey. And so for me, success in the next 3 or 4 years is we've now launched multiple tiers of products with different price ranges that everyone at those price ranges likes, and the ones at the lower price ranges aspire to get to the next one. So that to me would make me very happy, is that we've kind of made, we have a brand that people respect and look at and say, we really like what these folks are doing. They're honest, they're genuine, and they're not just out there looking to make a quick buck. They're really here for a lasting legacy.
Yeah. Ari, as the whiskey maker, what does that look like for you?
Well, I agree with everything that Raj just said. This is about more than just making whiskey and putting a whiskey into the market. This is an expression of who we are, who the company is. This is how we are choosing to use our labors. But selfishly, personally, the idea of working with this incredible team, continuing to riff on mash bills by making international cross-category blends in the Legacy series, again, exploring the culture and agriculture of different places in the world and communicating those stories. Again, you said it beautifully earlier when you said music and history and a sense of place are all of these means of connecting that we all want these days. In an increasingly digitized world, it's important to keep a hold of things like music, history, sense of place, and connections with people. So success is really fleshing out this idea of the gypsy spirit with new, delicious whiskeys that tell stories that are meaningful to us and meaningful to the rest of the caravan.
No, that makes sense. And I'm excited for the future because I've enjoyed, personally, Scott's only got to enjoy these two. I've gotten to enjoy the whole collection. I'm excited for the future because accessibility was the thing that I was worried about as the brand first came out. Like, I as a media person, gosh, I never thought I'd say that terminology. Was worried like, hey, like this is really cool. Was really hyped up about it. Huge Eric Church fan. Saw him in Louisville when I was 18 years old. He played a free concert at 4th Street Live, like hand of God. It was hot summer nights. And Eric Church played Metallica for his encore for 15 minutes. And like, I've been hooked on Eric Church since. Sinners Like Me, so I was all in on this just from the get-go. I didn't have to catch up on the discography like you all. I'd grown with Eric. And that was my thing is could his consumers, could his fans afford it? Right. Like not as a celebrity brand, but as someone who wanted to support Eric in his endeavors. And so when the Explorer came out and I was able to enjoy it, I was like, man, now they're onto something. And hearing about your all's future plans makes me excited because the category needs more people approaching that, $30, $40 price point, because the category's gone so ultra premium. We got to come back to reality for the average American consumer. And as we all know, prices of groceries have gone up. So I can't afford as much as expensive whiskey as I once used to.
Yeah. And Jake, the price has gone up. It's crazy. It's hard as a new brand because, when you're buying third-party product and most of the products out there are third-party product, it's expensive. So It's very hard, to make money in this space. I mean, we're not making money, but hopefully we do eventually. It's those lower price point products. We've been buying product so that we can launch a lower price point product over time and actually do okay. You're never going to make a lot of money in that, but it does. I think it does a service for Eric's fans. We've been focused on the holistic whiskey universe, including his fans. But I think this next product will hopefully allow the majority of his fans to be part of this, as well as other whiskey drinkers who can't afford what's happening. I mean, I'm worried the inflation is going to impact pricing in this market. You're already seeing prices going up. I don't see how it doesn't, between the cost of wood, cooperage, just grains in general. I have a feeling we're going to see prices continue to go up. We're trying to actually go the opposite. We're trying to take lower margin and bring our products down to allow people to have access. We could have charged a lot more for Explorer. We specifically chose not to.
Yeah.
So we're hoping, next 3 to 5 years, as I said, a lot more people are able to come in, and we'll suck it up for that. It costs a lot of money, but Eric and I have been blessed to be able to, to afford that. So hopefully we can allow that to bring some more people into our universe.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we as people that talk about whiskey love the fact that, people are willing to make that sacrifice so that the sum of the parts can be the whole, right? And they don't get to miss out on that. I really appreciate your all's time tonight and tomorrow. Scott, you have anything, closing shots for Ari or Raj?
No, this has been a lot of fun. I know Jake's, like he said, he's kind of been spoiled and been able to explore the whole portfolio. Tonight is the second time trying batch 1, first time trying batch 2. I'm excited. I think it's a lot of fun what you guys are doing.
Yep.
Ari, I've got a lot of respect for you and your whiskey making prowess. Like, obviously you've been involved in several different projects, and I think y'all have a great team, and it's a lot of fun to see a brand that is going this deep into like whiskey nerddom, because a lot of stuff gets lost in whiskey, whiskey making, like slapping a label on another bottle. It loses a lot of appeal for us, and to see like what's going into these products and how the fun is back into it is very interesting for us. And I think that's probably the most exciting thing for us to talk about this brand.
Yeah. Yeah. This won't be the last conversation, for sure. And again, we appreciate all the things that your all's team has done. Whoever wants to take this, we like to give our guests the opportunity. Obviously it's easy to find Eric Church, but like, where can you all find out, where can consumers, our listeners, find out more about Whiskey JYPSI so that they can stay tuned to all the releases and everything?
The best place is at our website, www.whiskygypsy.com. Whiskey is spelled like you would generally spell whiskey in America with an E, E-Y. Gypsy is spelled JYPSI. Definitely check out the website. We have a lot of fantastic information, videos, interviews on the website, and our social media team is second to none. So make sure you subscribe to our socials, Instagram, Facebook. There's a ton of fantastic, really informative content going up there. It's not just your typical whiskey company, throw a picture of a bottle or people around a campfire dancing and singing. There's real content there. And I think if you follow Whiskey JYPSI or visit the website, you'll learn something about the whiskey and about the brand.
Yeah, but the troubadour would probably be dancing around the fire while they're
we love dancing around fires, but we do more than we do a lot, including dancing around the fire.
Sorry, Jake. I was just going to say there's going to be a lot more content coming up over the next few months. So I think people will enjoy. We filmed some neat videos for some people about some people. So there'll be a lot. Hopefully, there's more of a holistic approach to this that you'll see on our website and on Instagram over time.
Yeah, and don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter is great. I appreciate that. And you may see a Bourbon Lens review tag there along the way. So just make sure you sign up there. And then go over to bourbonlens.com and check out all of our reviews of all the Whiskey JYPSI products. They are favorable. I hate to break it to you all because they're making good stuff and they've procured a lot of great whiskey. So until next time, guys, we really appreciate it. Raj, have a wonderful Wednesday or Tuesday. I'm going to go to sleep here. So is Ari and Scott. but really appreciate it. And hopefully you can stay dry there in India. So cheers, guys, and have a great day or night's sleep.
Cheers,
Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks so much for having
your time.
us.
Yeah, it was
Appreciate
a
it.
lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. Make sure you're connected with Scott and I via social media on Instagram, X, and Facebook. We'd love to connect. And if you're more the professional type, follow us over on LinkedIn. If you want to know more about Bourbon Lens, make sure you're subscribed to our weekly newsletter, The Weekly Pour. For exclusive content and more, check out Patreon. Follow us there at Bourbon Lens. And last but not least, on your favorite podcast listening app, make sure you're subscribed because every Monday, Scott and I release a podcast, and we would love to have you here listening to the newest features and the newest whiskey news. And until next time, cheers.